Okay. Well, welcome back, Amy and everyone.
Yeah,
So we this is our second session now. It's a few weeks after the first one. So in the first one, of course, we did a little bit of talking about um just general introduction about what the primeval history is and a little bit of discussion about the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Septuagint. And then we had talked about one particular textual variant that was related to how the Hebrew and the Greek texts are different and discuss some of those or some of the implications about that one particular thing. And so it occurs to me that I should say that how we are planning this, Amy, you and I, is having a series of conversations that are roughly chronological, like working through the text kind of in order,
hmm
from Genesis 1:1 through Genesis 11. And so the next one for us is in verse 2, Genesis 1, verse 2. And I'm going to share my screen. Amy, you're seeing my screen now, yes?
I am. That looks great.
Okay, awesome. All right. So, what we are discussing today, the theme question for today is, does ruach elohim refer to the Holy Spirit? So I'm going to read this verse in Hebrew in just a second, but the specific term in view here is in Hebrew, we call this a construct chain. It's where two nouns, in Hebrew, a construct chain is where you have two nouns that are linked together. Like how I say it to students is they are smashed together to become one grammatical unit. And usually, uh, how we interpret or how we translate that is with the word of in the middle. So ruach Elohim here. This is the term that we're specifically kind of honing in on today. Okay, so and how we were thinking to for this to go was we're going to talk about the Hebrew text first and what are the possibilities of meaning for the Hebrew, and then look at the Greek side, which would be here, this phrase, pneuma theou. What are the possibilities of meaning on the Greek side in the Greek translation? And then from that, talk about what are the possibilities of meaning be, pre-incarnation, right before Jesus, and then how does our thinking about this verse maybe change or be influenced by after Jesus,
Mm.
after the incarnation? Anything you want to add to that before we dive in, Amy?
No, no, that was the clear plan.
Yes. Okay. All right, so here's the full verse in Hebrew is v'haaretz hayata tohu v'vohu v'choshek al panei tohom v'ruach Elohim marachefet al panei hamayim. And the earth was tohu v'vohu. I translate this formless and empty.
Mhm.
And darkness was over the face of the deep. And I like to translate this vav with but. I think this is
Mm.
a contrast. But ruach Elohim, the spirit of God, not to prejudice the jury, the spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Okay, so there are two reasons why this issue is particularly thorny, um, in on the Hebrew side, because of this word ruach, which has three legitimate meanings in English. We can translate this word ruach legitimately as spirit, as wind, or as breath. Like those are, if I were to pull up the lexicon, we would see all of those. And then we have this word Elohim, which is the word for God. And you can see in our English texts there, it's translated God in the singular with a capital G. And of course, why this is difficult is because this word Elohim in Hebrew, this has a plural ending on it. This chirik yod with a final mem there, that's plural. And so it's a standard way, like throughout this narrative, Elohim is translated God, like a singular God, with a capital G. So like referring to the one true God. But it is possible that like if the author wanted to say gods, plural, with a small g, this is how you would say it. So that's a legitimate way of translating this word. Also, in Hebrew, it's not very common, but it is a thing that a Hebrew author in the Hebrew Bible will use Elohim as an adjective. So meaning that something is like either a comparative or a superlative, meaning like it's grand or greater than normal, or even like the grandest or greatest or mightiest. Um, and so that's why we have in KJV, NIV, and NRSV, why we have the distinction here of the NRSV translators have just made a different decision, right? They have decided that ruach means wind. Um, and you can find some translations. I should have looked this up before we talk, and I didn't. But I have seen some translations that say mighty wind here instead of wind from God. Um, but we just have we have an issue here, or an instance. That's what I'm trying to say. An instance where translators have made a different decision about what that word ruach, the translation value of ruach in that particular case. Okay. So, I would love to get your feedback as I'm talking through this, Amy, in terms of what, because it seems to me that if on the simplest level, if I just say, what are my options for ruach, spirit, wind, or breath? It seems to me like breath is like the least best option,
Mhm.
in that breath seems to rely on a body, right?
Yeah,
Like you have to have a body to produce breath, and we have nothing in this text so far that indicates God would have a body.
right.
So, so I think that well, and I'm cheating a little bit. Later in chapter 2, God is going to breathe, and it's a different word for breath
Ah,
that is used.
okay.
So I think right where I think our sensible options would be either like spirit of God, or perhaps spirit from God,
Mhm.
or maybe I should say spirit of God, and the relationship indicated by the preposition of, meaning that of source,
Right.
as opposed to a possession, or right, which are both legitimate senses of
Mhm.
that in context of. So
Mm,
either like spirit of God, spirit from God, wind of God, or wind from God. I feel like those are kind of the the options, at least for ruach. And we might have we might have this could be an adjective, right? It could be mighty. Um, but but it's rare, right? That to for Elohim to be used as an adjective, there's only a handful of occurrences where it used in the Hebrew Bible, but it is possible. Okay, so yeah, let me just pause there. What are your thoughts there about, like, as I'm talking through that kind of Hebrew phrase? Any thoughts about Hebrew there?
I appreciate that you are laying on the table all of the options, right? This
Yeah.
shows the challenge of translation is that legitimately there are multiple choices for each word, and therefore the interrelationship between them is even more options, right? That's multiplied.
Yes.
But then you're walking through a process of elimination by which some of those really aren't fitting or would be really a stretch. So I think you've laid out well what's possible. I think moving to the Greek is really interesting because then we get someone who's doing exactly what you're doing, translating.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so what decisions has this person made if in fact they're looking at exactly the same Hebrew text that we are? And since there's just two words, it seems quite likely that that's the case.
Yes.
So I think your
Yes.
assessment, I would fully agree with those options you've laid out. Spirit from God, or breath from God are the most viable. Or not breath, I said the wrong thing. Excuse me. Wind from
Wind,
God.
right. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because breath is a
Yes.
body and that doesn't work.
Oh, and and I should say before we move to the Greek, in that I think the compelling, like I think what the NRSV translators are thinking, I think, when they translate wind is like we have the setting of this verse is like this ocean. It uses the word like earth. So um, right. So it makes like it just in if we're looking at the world around us, if you're by an ocean, it makes like the wind fits. It fits the picture, like the scene. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So then, talk us through this Greek. What are our options on this on the Greek side here?
Yeah. So similar options for pneuma, which could be spirit or wind or breath. But the
Oh
options
yeah.
for, because you have like Jesus breathed out his last from the cross, that's a pneusin, right? That's a verbal
Oh
form of
yes.
this noun. So that is also an option. Uh,
Yeah.
your
Got
op
it.
your options for theou, also a genitive of God, are more limited than the Hebrew because it is in fact singular. So there's no possibility that you could have a plural here. That would be a different ending. That would be theou. That
Right.
would be the genitive plural. So you don't have that choice, which means that the translator from Hebrew to Greek saw Elohim as speaking of a singular, the one
Yep.
God, which
Yep.
is common, as you mentioned. So that
Yep.
means that you have a genitive construct. The second noun is in the genitive, so you have lots of different options for the genitive. But as you've mentioned, source makes good sense. The spirit from God, or the wind from God.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you take the on the genitive here? So for people who are watching this omicron and this oo ending, what
Mhm.
looks like an ou, that's the genitive ending there.
Mhm.
That's indicating like usually how we translate would be of,
Precisely.
similar to how
Yeah.
we translate this construct chain.
Hmm.
And it's a similar kind of we have a similar kind of ambiguity in terms of the genitive in Greek, right? Like
There's
there's
so
a
many options.
whole
Exactly.
yes,
Massive
exactly.
list. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So and the same thing is in it's not quite as long as the Greek options. But if you have a good Hebrew grammar will list many options for the relationship between what we call the construct noun and the absolute noun. Um, so I guess I'm curious, like if you ignore the Hebrew for a second, if you as
Hmm.
a Greek scholar, if you just come across Spirit of God,
Hmm.
how would you just as Greek, like reading typical Koine Greek,
Hmm.
how would you understand the relationship between those two things? In other words, like between these two nouns, is this is is this author
Hmm.
in Greek differentiating pneuma and theos as
Mm.
distinct entities
Mm.
or not? I think that's the $1 million question in this,
Yes. Yes.
right? Um
Hmm. Yeah.
is by using the genitive here, is the author trying to say that right? Like because I think that's the distinction between spirit of God and spirit from
Mhm.
God. Spirit from God necessitates that those are two different entities.
Right.
Whereas a spirit of God,
Yeah.
there's it's more ambiguous.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I'm just curious, like how do you read that, or
yeah.
like what's your first
Well,
reflection?
I a more a narrow focus. If you only had one word rather than two, you could say, and God hovered or was over the
Right.
waters. And so you have some distinction in that you have
Yes.
pneuma theou, like and
Yes.
again, we're dealing with a translation here, but let's ignore the Hebrew for a moment. Let's say I'm just
Yep.
reading this
Yep.
phrase in Greek. You could
Yep.
have God, just God does this work, but you
Yes.
have pneuma theou. So there's some, and I'm thinking as much as I can as a Greek thinker, there's some sense of
Yes.
emanation here. Something is radiating
Mm-hmm.
out from God. There's not just the statement that God in God's self is doing this work, but the pneuma of God. And
Yes.
so a force, a wind, a procession, like there's something not wholly different, right? We don't have like a
Yep.
different person here. Like this would not be on the mind of the original Greek translator, but you have some distinction. Yes.
Yep. Yes. So I would say almost down the line, I would say the same thing about the
Mm-hmm.
Hebrew text here,
Mm-hmm.
right? In that it is a perfectly valid option for the Hebrew author to just keep using Elohim as the author has done in verse
Mm.
1, that
Right, right.
Elohim is the one who created. And so presumably there's some distinction, there's some reason why this author says ruach and
Hmm.
not Elohim.
Right. That's a great
So
way. That comparison is really helpful to illuminate that.
yes. So so again, like as I'm talking this through, I can understand how and why the NRSV translators are deciding wind from God,
Mm-hmm.
um because, well, it's from a theological and conceptual standpoint, it's safe, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's it it's safe in that, oh, it answers these questions. Well, if ruach means refers to a wind, then I don't have any problems with whether ruach is different than God or not. It's obviously different. They're
Mm-hmm.
obviously two different things. Um, yeah. Uh, but I don't think it does mean wind of God. I think it means spirit of God.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so yeah, okay. And I'm under I think I'm reading that you would do the same thing. You would not tend to read pneuma theou as wind. Like if you're just reading this
Mm.
as yeah, no, let me ask you that. Yeah, if you're just
Yeah.
reading this as Greek, like just again pretending without the Hebrew text,
Mm-hmm.
like would you read it as spirit or would you read it as wind?
So, right, I have two answers to that. Very good question. Just if
Yeah.
I'm reading myself and reading the Greek here, I'm so trained by the New Testament to see
Mm-hmm.
pneuma theou as Spirit of God. If
Right.
I were a Septuagintal scholar and I spent the majority of my time in the Septuagint, maybe my mental default would be different. So, because I spend my time majority in the Greek New Testament, I'd want to do a little word search, right? Of like, how does spirit manifest, particularly in Genesis? And I'm telling you things you already know, right? But the
Perfect.
next time
Yep.
you get
Yep.
the reiteration is in 6:3. My pneuma shall not abide in these humans forever because they're flesh. And then in
Yes.
6:17, the spirit of life. So it looks, if I do a quick, consideration of what's going on in Genesis, something more than just the natural world in which God, as creator, sends wind. Something more seems to be going on when pneuma is used in other places in Genesis. Now, that doesn't mean that that has to be the meaning in this first iteration, right? You could have the
Yep.
same term with
Yep.
different connotations, but that would at least open me to the possibility that we have something more than natural wind, but really something, how would I want to say this? Because wind is directly from God, but something that is also supernatural,
Yep. Yep.
something divine.
I'm totally with you. And I I have a I have a textual reason to conclude that
Mm,
in this
okay.
within the sentence, but I
Yeah.
think you brought up a couple really good methodological points in what you just said that I want to make sure are not lost. And that is what I hear you saying is like kind of um your problem solving method, like when you come if you were to come across this word pneuma and you're
Mhm.
like, I wonder which specific meaning is being activated by this use, that you would go to how is this the same author using this term in contexts that are as close to this context as you can, right? So like you said, you're going to go to Genesis 6 where this word pneuma appears again. um and so I just want to highlight that like this kind of comparative, right? Comparative analysis.
Mhm.
This is how uh right we go about trying to determine what meaning is activated in a particular instance.
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, so and working in progressive layers outward, right? So
Yes,
like
well
the
said.
more the closer in context you can get to your actual instance, the better that data is, or the
Yeah,
better that information is. Yeah.
that's correct.
So I did my dissertation on light, right?
Yeah.
The use of the word light in Hebrew. And this was a lesson, like if you were to ask me what is the lesson that you, Joel, learned as a scholar more than any other in doing your dissertation, it for me it was that local context, like the immediate context of a verse or a word, is always the most helpful, right?
Mm,
It's like, and the more quickly you tend to jump away from the local context, the worse your conclusions get, right?
mm,
It's like, so in other words, like I'm better off. I'm gonna have better conclusions if I juice this immediate context for as many possible contextual clues as I
mhm.
possibly can, right?
Right,
Before I start like going to the book of Isaiah. Or
right, right.
you see what I'm saying? Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Um yeah, so it's yeah, it was like that was a lesson that was just taught to me like in spades in doing that
Mm,
um that research. So one thing I do want to say is that we don't have to take time to talk about through all of these things, but one of the things I did was I took this Hebrew
mhm,
phrase, right? This construct chain, ruach elohim, and you see these are all the instances of when it occurs in this specific
mm.
as a construct chain in the Hebrew Bible,
That's
and
helpful.
um so and basically uh to summarize this is in virtually every single one of these it really appears to mean spirit of God
Mm,
and not wind or
okay.
breath.
Mm,
um and specifically because it appears as this term, like spirit of God, like has a personal agency.
mm,
So for example, in Genesis 41, right, this is Pharaoh talking about Joseph. Like, can we
mm.
find anyone like this man, one in whom is the spirit of God? um right, like
Yeah.
this doesn't appear to be wind, right?
Right.
And it
Right.
doesn't appear
Exactly.
to
Well,
be
that would not make
breath.
sense.
there's
Right.
there's something personal, right?
Mm,
Some kind of personal agency.
yeah.
Same thing here, right? Of Exodus 31. So this is the people who are empowered to build the tabernacle, right? I have filled him with the spirit of God, with wisdom,
Mhm.
understanding, right? Which seems wisdom, understanding, knowledge, skills, like those don't seem to fit at all with wind or
Right.
breath.
That's right.
Okay. Um, awesome. Okay. So then finally, and this is the thing that to me is compelling evidence he, for the in its original context that we should read Spirit of God here is because this is a participle that's functioning as a finite verb.
Mm.
At least participles are funny, but if I'm reading this with my Hebrew hat on, I'm just like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's a participle functioning as a finite verb.
Mhm.
And this is the word, usually it's translated as hovering, or is the NIV translated as hovering?
Yeah.
Um, and this word is used also in Deuteronomy of a bird, right? It's only used twice
Oh,
in the
interesting.
Hebrew Bible. But it's a bird hovering, and specifically like an eagle.
Huh.
Um, and what I think the word picture that is being drawn here is like an eagle. Eagles, when the parents are teaching their young to fly, they will flap their wings and they will hover above the nest in order to create an updraft of air to help the young to learn to fly, right? Like it gives them right, it creates an updraft above the nest that helps the young ones spread their wings and at least begin to get up off the
Wow.
ground. In which case, right, I mean, it's clearly an avian image,
Yeah.
which seems to necessitate, again, agency,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's hard for me to attribute that kind of action to simply breath or simply
Right.
wind.
Right. Oh,
So
that's well said.
so then I guess my next question then is what about this Greek verb?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything to be gained in this regard by this Greek verb?
Yeah, I was considering that in preparation for today. Let me go back to the work that I was doing there.
Oh yeah.
Um, so let me get that. So epiphero, to carry, to bring, it definitely has with this preposition the sense of over. So the
Mm-hmm.
was and so there's a bit it's a little bit different than hovering. I noticed like the I'm not sure if it's on your screen here, the NATI, oh, the like the nets, the translation of the Septuagint into English.
I
It has it
don't I don't have it.
totally fine. I can
Oh,
just say
okay.
it verbally. The divine or uh the spirit was being carried along over the water. So
Oh, that's so interesting.
exactly, because it is a middle, and so
Yeah.
it's an interesting choice, epiphero. Um, I'm just going to do a double check here to see where else that appears. If we can just get some purchase on, um,
That's so interesting.
it also gets translated as inflict or to bring upon. Those are slightly different forms of the verb, but it's not exactly hovering here. It's a little
Right.
bit different of a
Right.
choice. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna pull up the Hebrew. I'm gonna pull up the Hebrew verb because I was not paying attention to the fact that that Greek verb is in the middle
Right.
voice.
Mm.
Um yeah, it's only okay, so it's only Pe'el. So the fact that the Hebrew verb is only in Pe'el, um it would be rare for either a middle or a passive to be in the Pe'el stem.
Okay.
Not unheard of, but it would be very rare. So so that which that's just very interesting of that that lends credence to the idea that these the Greek translators they're making a choice to translate it in
Mhm.
middle.
Yeah.
Does that make
And
sense? Like,
absolutely. Oh, I
yeah,
see. Yes, yes, because that wouldn't be, you're saying, the norm of the PL.
that's exactly right.
Got it.
Yes, like as a Hebraist, that word that verb choice or voice choice is a little bit surprising.
Yeah. And I mean, you get a real clear sense of what's going on here. The next time it appears in Genesis, it's speaking of the ark, and it's exactly the same form, an imperfect,
Oh,
middle,
interesting.
indicative, third singular. The ark was being carried along on top of the water. That's
Oh, interesting.
7:18.
Yes, 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 yes.
So yeah, the Spirit of God, um, yeah, there is more, or the middle,
Yes.
there's quite a bit of debate in Greek, but you could have the sense of carried along over the waters. But it's not quite active, right? Like it's
Right.
a little bit different than that.
So, yeah, so that's really interesting. So what I'm kind of wondering now and talking this through is right, because that seems to like if I'm using this Greek verb, the image seems to be a little bit more not necessarily like an eagle hovering over a nest, but more like more like soaring, right? Like
Yes.
that they're
Yes.
being acted
Right.
upon by the wind.
Yes. Yes. That continues the picture. Yeah. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Which
Um,
I mean, I wonder if, we were talking a moment ago about the spirit being sourced from God. It's almost as if you have that same sense of God's action. God both is sending the spirit and then the actor by which the spirit is being moved along the
yes,
face of the water.
yes, yes. So the reason why I'm pausing here is I'm thinking about whether this use of the middle voice in the Greek tense impacts what I think about agency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it does, but it also I don't think it in like I still think ruach elohim has to I still think this text is conceptualizing ruach elohim as exercising agency, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not as
Mm-hmm.
strong, right? It's not
Right. Right.
it's not as strong.
At least in the Greek. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I presume that I mean the Greek translators they have some reason for right, they have some reason for translating it in middle as opposed to active.
Right.
Uh,
Yes.
but I would on the surface of it, like if I'm reading this in Hebrew, I would not understand that verb as being middle or passive in any way. I would
Mm.
read it as being active. That's yeah, so that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Because that's certainly an option. Epiphero as an active appears at least 14
Right.
times. So that could happen, but
Yep.
that's not the choice given here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. So, okay, so we've been talking about for quite a while now, like possibilities of meaning, like aside from any kind of incarnation,
Mm.
right? Incarnation editing the picture or entering the picture, just
Hmm.
how is a Hebrew speaker and a Greek
Mm.
translator, how are they understanding the sentence?
Hmm.
And so, um, it seems like we're both satisfied that the best that Spirit of God is the best sense. Um, yeah, I'm trying to I'm just thinking through before we go on and before we enter the incarnation,
Sure.
whether there's anything more here. And but I don't think so. I think I'm satisfied to leave this as is. And once we get to the use of plural pronouns in for God, like in the
Hmm.
creation story, this might come up later. Right?
Mm.
You see what I mean? Like in
Yes,
terms of
totally.
how do
Yes.
we
Right.
understand plural? How do we understand the use of plurality with God?
Right.
But I think. yeah, but I think I'm satisfied with we can leave the ambiguity of Spirit of God and the yeah. To what degree are Spirit and God differentiated
Mm.
or are they not? I
Mhm.
think I'm okay with that. Are you satisfied?
Yeah, I mean, if I understand Israel scriptures correctly, that definitely there's this idea that God does work at times by sending the Spirit.
Right.
Now that's not right seen as an entity apart from God, but more as God, the vehicle by which God does work. Um, it's a way of
Right.
God interacting with creation, and so that I think would be what is seen here. Maybe
Right.
help me with this. Would it be seen similarly with like God's mighty arm? Sometimes that language is used for the enactment of God's work.
So that's interesting. Of that usually I've not done a comprehensive study of the idea of God's arm, but
Mm.
what the work I have done on that is that the phrase appears to refer to a specific event in that of the Exodus, right?
Got it.
Like
Okay. Okay.
and
Mm.
there's a similar type of thing of like the like the creation work that we see in Genesis 1 seems to be talked about as like the work of God's fingers, right? Like very fine, detailed, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
detail and intricacy that
Yeah.
is kind of highlighted in that metaphor, as opposed to the work of saving Israel from
Mm.
Egypt and Pharaoh, is like reflected of the might or strength of God
I see. I
in the
see.
use of the arm. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I do. Yeah, that's a helpful distinction.
Um, yeah. So again, like you're talking about spirit, like if I think it, and that's certainly true, right? In the Hebrew Bible, to have God interacting with human persons, especially human persons, via this Spirit of God, whatever the Spirit of God is, right? Like often this coming over type of
Yes. Yes.
imagery. Yeah. And that doesn't seem to, at least I have not had any kind of conversations with like Jewish scholars that would see any type like that the Spirit of God imagery or language doesn't seem to compromise the oneness of God,
No, none
right?
at all.
But
Exactly. Right.
but I'm also not, what's the word? I'm not well read enough on, I haven't gone deep enough into Jewish theology to know like how Jewish a Jewish theologian would wrestle with that. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like
Right.
whether what levels or what kinds of distinctions are there between spirit and God?
Mhm.
Okay. So let's go on to the big question then. Of course, the big
Yeah.
question is we're Christians and we confess the Trinity because that's what Jesus told us to do. So now, should we understand this as ruach Elohim as a specific reference to the Holy Spirit, or should we not? Or like, what sense should we make of that? Let me just ask you that question just raw. Like, what do
Mm.
you think?
Yes. I think that's a yes answer.
Love it. I love
But I'm
it.
thinking through all of the reasons why what's underneath that yes.
Yes.
So with the coming of the Son incarnate, then there is the sending of the Spirit, and there is a revelation of what has always been true of God eternally, that God exists
Yes.
as one God in three persons. And so much of reading Israel's scriptures through the lens of the Christ and the Spirit event is to say, oh, these things were always here, but we didn't see them in this way.
Yes.
So if God is creator and God is, and the persons of the triune God are always involved in all of the actions of the triune God, then it's actually not surprising at all that the Spirit is
Right.
at work here. So that maybe is a first answer. As you can hear in my language, as listeners will be able to hear, I'm very informed by the tradition, right?
Of course.
These are things
Yes.
in scripture, but how believers throughout time have come to think and give language to this reality of God triune. I'm also
Yes.
struck as we were talking, what makes me excited as an exegete is the avian imagery that you're bringing forth
Yes.
feels very consonant with the baptism story of Jesus,
Absolutely.
that the
Yes.
Spirit descends as a dove. If
Hmm.
I could tell a quick story, when I was editing New
Please.
Testament in color, we had some indigenous scholars writing on the project, and they were so helpful to call our attention, to really open my eyes to where God is at work in and through creation, not human
Yeah.
creation, but more. And so
Yes.
the ways in which the language of the baptism story and the dove as the manifestation of the Spirit,
Yes.
they didn't jump over that in ways that I had tended to do. So it was really reading from believers who are coming out of an indigenous background that helped me to see how important that is. And because
Yes.
I have done that work, now I can hear what you're saying is like, oh my goodness, this is not to be missed. I think the
Right.
evangelists, either explicitly or by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit or both, are making connections to a rather avian manifestation of the Spirit in this Genesis narrative.
Yes. Yes. Or maybe to say that
Or how would you say that differently, Joel?
no, 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 I don't want to mishear. This isn't what you're saying. You are not saying that the spirit is appearing as a bird in the creation narrative. That's not what you're
No,
saying.
no, 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 that is no, no, that's right.
Right.
No. Good clarification.
Which is what I immediately thought when your sentence.
No, no,
You are saying that this word choice is
yes,
using an avian image.
exactly.
That's what you're saying. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Um,
So there are
and
connotations here that are kind of radiating out of the term without
yes.
saying this is a bird, right? No, it's the pneuma,
Right.
theou, or it's
Yes.
the ruach
Yes.
elohim. But those kind of threads, it just makes me want to do more thinking and exploration. Are those threads being picked up in the baptismal story?
Yes. That's really interesting. Yeah, and I just think like the comparisons of the Spirit of God to birds just in general, like not just in the Hebrew Bible, but also in Christian art, right?
Mm.
Like um there's a lot there, I think. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. Um
So,
so
and I
I
don't see
oh,
these
go ahead.
pre and post incarnational readings as radically different. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, right? A reader who's first encountering this translation, this text, is going to think, God is at work, and often God is at work through the Spirit. So this is a
Yes.
manifestation of God. Reading now as those who understand God as triune, we would say the same thing, that God is at work here um, through the Spirit, and that is sourced in God and comes from God. Now, we would give more agency to the Spirit, given all of
Yes.
the texts that we have, which really is what prompts early Christians to say the Spirit is a person of the triune God. And so this is maybe a first expression of that, which makes us need to return back to this whole sense of the middle verb,
Yes.
which I would want to do
Yes.
more work on, and maybe probably go to patristic interpreters of this text. Did they see any alliance between God and the Spirit and the work that's happening here?
Yes.
We've
Yes.
only, for me, Joel, this conversation has only prompted more questions that I want to explore. But maybe that's the
As
the
always.
feature
No.
of a good
Well,
conversation.
yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that like there's definitely a long tradition in or a long history in the Christian tradition of reading this phrase ruach elohim as referring to the Holy Spirit.
Mhm, mhm.
Like there are many interpreters, like Christian interpreters, read it that way. I think that right the big question that it's a little more prescient for me as a Hebrew scholar
Right.
is, well, does this author have
Mm,
a Trinitarian conception of God or a Binitarian conception of God?
No.
And right, right. So, okay, so you immediately answered no. So why are you saying no?
I mean, my sense of like the writing of scripture is that the people who are writing have the knowledge that is available to them at that time. And
Right.
so because this is being composed before the revelation of the Son and the sending of the Spirit, that
Yep.
author would not have access. Is it in
Right.
disagreement with what comes to be revealed? No, but it
Right.
is also not in the mind of the person who's doing this writing. And yet the
Right.
words are constructed in such a way that they are apt to describe what we would now know to be the work of the person, the Holy Spirit.
Yep. Yep. No, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. So, and I like how you answered that. I like how you answered that question of that finally, like, what is the evidence that we would point to hold us back from concluding that the Hebrew author has a Trinitarian
Mm.
conception of God is a historical argument, right? And
Yeah.
that you're saying that we really are dependent on Jesus to reveal the
Mhm.
Trinitarian nature of God to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Um, and so it seems presumptuous. I'll use
Mhm.
that word. It would be presumptuous of us to assign Trinitarian meaning to this text. Like we certainly don't have enough evidence to conclude that.
Exactly. Right.
And yes, and I would agree. I would agree right down the line. I think again, like the I think that the place where this conversation gets very interesting is once we have definitive plural pronouns being used for God,
Mm.
like in this creation narrative, then how do we go about answering that? And
Mhm.
as a like on the Hebrew side, right? Like there are what's the word? There's the introduction of the plural pronouns for God be can get off the rails. What I
Mm.
think the
Um,
explanations of those can get off the rails. I think that
mhm.
gets um yeah that, that, that
Yeah.
that's that's really all I'm going to say for now.
So it sounds like this conversation has prepared us to avoid some pitfalls in the next conversation.
I would say yes.
Okay, good, good.
In that this yes that this goes back to like when we get to the place where we have plural pronouns for God, rather than I think what I would want to do, I think what is a good method is to say, well, how can we understand plural pronouns for God using our local clues that are
Mm,
local
good.
clues that
Yeah.
are local to this context, as opposed to jumping to either works that are outside the Hebrew Bible or even to
Mhm.
other places that are in the Hebrew Bible, at least right offhand, right? And so like
Yeah.
and so that's why I think yeah, that's why I think this is I think that this understanding the sense of ruach Elohim is it's vitally important
Hmm.
um uh because it's difficult it's difficult to understand. Yeah, I would say that. I think it's difficult to understand locally the plural pronouns for God
Hmm.
without this kind of disambiguation that's already happened.
That's helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Does that have I said that clear enough
Yeah.
in
No,
what
that
I'm
totally
saying?
makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two gives you
Yeah.
a clue to unlock what will follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so and going back to like I put this in my notes that I shared with you of like right my own conclusion as a Christian Hebraist is that or how I think about it is like the shoe of this phrase, right, in Genesis 1:2, it fit uh the shoe the shoe of this phrase in Hebrew fits the foot of Trinitarian theology.
Ooh, That's well said. I love
right?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, like but it doesn't prove in and of itself, it doesn't prove that there's any kind of that the author has a multi-personal
Right.
conception of God,
Right.
not an of itself.
Now, that's a very clear way of picturing it. The words are just right for that later understanding, but that
Yes,
later understanding is not filling in the mind of the author who wrote the words by the inspiration of the Spirit.
yes, yes. And then one final thing that I think is really interesting that fascinates me about how, because you referenced a few minutes ago John, right? Like
Mhm.
the prologue to John
Yes.
certainly looks like it's referencing this story,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
and it's what's fascinating to me is how right here in Genesis we have no mention of any kind of son, right? Like
Right.
no sort of God's son,
Right.
but in John we don't really have mention of spirit, right? But it's like it again like the whole picture it fits, right?
Yeah.
It like John and Genesis together fit this Trinitarian picture, which is really beautiful.
Yes,
There's something very poetic about that.
it is. Absolutely.
Okay.